Buenos días, good morning. I am Richard Flouet, the Vice Rector for Internationalization and Cooperation at the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria in Spain. And I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all a warm welcome, a warm virtual welcome to the second International Conference on Regional Integration, entitled The European Union, Mediterranean and Africa Integration in the Global Age. It's been organized by the Jean Monnet Network, led by the Autonomous University of Madrid. Well, may I first introduce the members of this opening ceremony of the conference. We've got with us Dr. Rafael Robaina Romero, Rector of the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, Dr. Carmela Calles-Bouquet, Vice Rector for Internationalization at the University of Madrid, Dr. Nasara Cabrera Abu, General Director of Economic Relations with Africa from the Government of the Canary Islands, and Dr. José Mella, the conference organizer, Professor of Applied Economics, and the lead partner of the AMENET Jean Monnet Network from the University, the Autonomous University of Madrid. So I wish you all a warm welcome. Thank you for being with us today in this virtual conference. And I will give the floor, first of all, to Dr. Rafael Robaina, Rector of the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Just a few words to highlight the importance of this event of the Jean Monnet Actions. Last year, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the EU Jean Monnet Actions to promote European values in all EU countries. The Jean Monnet Actions are the part of Erasmus dedicated to promoting excellence in EU and higher education worldwide. Such actions aim at building bridges between universities, researchers, and EU policymakers, with the main priority to study and research in the field of EU integration and in a better understanding of Europe's place in a globalized world. The Jean Monnet Actions are organized and implemented through higher education establishments, but it represents an opportunity not only for universities, but for many other actors through the provision of modules, the achievement of chairs, centers of excellence, etc. And of course, projects such as AMENET, the European Union, Mediterranean and Africa Integration in the Global Age, whose coordinator is the Autonomous University of Madrid. Greetings to the Vice Rector, and of course to the Director, that I'm sure they should now be busy preparing the meeting of the rectors with the Minister right now. So I will be there as well, Carmela. As a partner in the project, it has been our responsibility to organize this second international conference through the Vice Rector's Office for Internationalization and Cooperation, Richard Flouet. Thank you, Richard. Just a few words also about our role in Africa, and particularly what we have called our network, University of the Northwestern Africa and Micronesia. We have established down here in Europe. The University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria has always been known for its evident wish to contribute to the development of the neighboring countries, and in particular to the social sectors most in need of support, in order to improve their living conditions and thus prevent people from being uprooted from their place of birth. This wish is expressed through a series of actions carried out within the scope of cooperation with African countries close to the Canary Islands. In this regard, our university has aligned in its strategy with those defined by the Canary Island government, which attached great importance to relations with West African countries such as Senegal, Mauritania, Cape Verde, Cabo Verde, or North African countries such as Morocco or Tunisia. Public higher education entities are a key factor in the development of the societies to which they belong and those that they educate. For this reason, our university cooperates and works with other universities and education centers from different member countries of those regions, of that region. Sorry. As a result, the network of University of Northwestern Africa and Micronesia was created at the initiative of the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria with the objective of intensifying the teaching and research cooperation in this geographical area. Universities from Northwestern Africa and Micronesia joined to form a global network of scientific and academic cooperation to promote the consolidation of this geographical area as an active and truly internationalized academic environment. The network is advancing in the consolidation of an instrument that promotes the internationalization of universities located in a privileged geostrategic area and that reclaims their prominence in history, evolution, as well as academic and economic development in the present and future of two continents, Africa and Europe. It remains just to hope to see you again, physically perhaps in the Canary Islands, who knows, in the future. Unfortunately, I have to leave you right now because a part of the meeting that we have with the other rectors and the minister, we have also kind of elections in our university, but I leave you in good hands, for sure, with the vice rectors and the other members of this panel. Thank you very much. See you sometime.
Thank you, Robaina. Thank you very much. Now, let me introduce Dr. Carmela Cales-Bourdet, who is the Vice Rector for Internationalization of the Autonomous University of Madrid. I'll give you the floor, Carmela.
Thank you very much, Richard. And good morning, Rector Robaina, Directora General Sara Cabrera, my dear Professor Mella, dear speakers, colleagues, students, all friends. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Soyez les bienvenus pour ces deux belles journées scientifiques qui commencent en ce moment. So it is my honor to be here today on behalf of my rector Rafael Garese, who, as the Rector Robaina has said, is now preparing his speech that some part of the strategic plan for 2020-2030 that the Conference of Rectors is presenting to the ministry. But it is such a pleasure to be here with you today. So I would love to be face to face, of course, without a mask, and in such a fantastic African location that is the island of Gran Canaria and its capital city, Las Palmas, of course. And I would be so happy to enjoy this wonderful conference for all its length, with such important speakers and such an interesting program. I think it's a timely event because in this time of pandemia that has frozen somehow the time, of course, and has such a great impact in our lives, in our activities, also in our free time. We have facing this pandemic, as I say, in a sort of impaired time for us. So it seems such a wonderful situation, and to get the most out of it, if that is possible, to think. So to encourage our thinking and our analysis and our creativity to build up the future. This future that will come without a virus, very hopefully, but with the climate still changing, and definitely with needs to face new and very, very demanding challenges. So AMENET for me is a jewel at WAM, and is a jewel that I particularly cherish, not only because of the excellence of the network and of the project headed by its leader, Professor Mella, but because working with African universities and with African institutions is now a key objective of WAM, a key objective within the most ambitious and exciting project that we are building at our university, that is the building of CIVIS, European Civic University. It's a European university that is one of the 17 pioneer alliances, together with other 24 that have been selected in the second call for this pilot project. A pilot project to build European universities, as I say, that the European Commission has started last year in order to test and develop new approaches to build the universities of the future. So again, we meet this future, and I can tell you that all 8 universities of CIVIS, which are Aix-Marseille University, La Sapienza, Athens, Bucharest, Tübingen, Stockholm, Université Libre de Bruxelles, and shortly Glasgow, that will join the alliance as an associate partner. So we want really, and we are committed to build this future together with our African partners. So as you may understand, that's why I am so happy always to meet with the AMENET network and all its his professors and researchers. So let me switch a bit into French just for a few and little words, because je ne voudrais pas finir sans dire quelques mots spécialement émus à la mémoire du professeur Mohamed Erami, qui était le président de l'université Abdelmadek Essadi. Le professeur Erami est récemment décédé à cause de ce Covid-19. Et le professeur Erami, je l'avais rencontré pour la première fois lors de la conférence à Tanger l'année dernière. Et il m'avait reçu avec une gentillesse vraiment remarquable, et notamment avec une volonté sincère aussi d'accroître les relations entre nos universités. Je lui avais parlé d'arranger une invitation pour qu'il nous visite avec ses collaborateurs à Madrid, et préciser de nouveaux projets communs à tous les membres de cette université amie mes condoléances les plus sincères. Et voilà, thank you very much to be here with us. Soyez les bienvenus. I wish you a very fruitful conference. Thank you very much, Richard.
To Dr. Masara Cabrera-Abu. Thank you for being with us today to inaugurate this second international conference, Regional Integration. It's very important for us to have the government of the Canary Islands with us. Dr. Masara Cabrera-Abu is the General Director of Economic Relations with Africa. Thank you very much, Masara.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning and welcome to the Second International Conference on Regional Integration of AMENET. Dear President of the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, Dr. Robaina, dear Vice Chancellor of the Autonomous University of Madrid, Dr. Calés, and dear conference organizer, Dr. Mella. First of all, I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation of the University of Las Palmas, Dr. Clouet, for inviting me to take part in the opening of this event, especially the Director of Cooperation, Javier de León. I would also like to say a big thank you to Matias González Hernández for helping me to learn more about this topic previously unknown to me. As you well know, both the Canary Islands government and also the central government of Spain, as well as the European Union, have all made a firm commitment to sustainable development. And in fact, within our European Interreg program, we have several several joint projects with African entities that are developed in this field. The key of this Congress can be considered part of this field, so I would like to congratulate you on this initiative. Without a doubt, proposing tourist development in Africa as a factor capable of mitigating the impacts of climate change is certainly not an easy challenge. The current reality is that the real political and specific economic activities carried out by other powers in Africa not only fail to come into line with the values of sustainable development, but even go against them. As far back as the Davos Declaration in 2007, the vulnerability of the sector to climate change and the impacts of tourism on climate itself were highlighted. Here today, however, the potential of the tourist sector to deal with and even to mitigate climate change is being underlined, thus opening up new and hopeful perspectives in this area. Today, more than ever, it is essential to align economic development with sustainable development, focusing especially on the African continent. I would very much like to point out two other reasons why I believe that this Congress, which underlines the potential of tourism as a contributing factor in strengthening African society's ability to adapt to climate change, is fundamental. In the first place, and as we know so well in the Canary Islands, tourism is one of the fastest growing economic sectors on the planet, contributing considerably to the national and local economies of many countries throughout the world. We are also well aware of the harm tourism causes to the environment and of the risks it can pose to a reef if its development is not managed from a sustainable and social development perspective. However, the ability of the tourist sector to adapt to climate change remains largely unknown, especially, and as studies on the matter show, in the case of the Global South in general, and in particular of African countries. This brings me to the second reason why I consider this Congress to be so important, namely the lack of existing research with regard to this issue in Africa. This is hardly surprising if we bear in mind that the epistemologists of the South, to use Boaventura de Sousa Santos' term, have been relegated to an epistemological monopoly of knowledge produced in the global North. In summary, Africa faces several real challenges when it comes to creating a sustainable tourism industry. Among these are technology, education, security, and the one that concerns us today, Congress, climate change, and environment. However, in a global era where the current world health crisis has reminded us of something we were already aware of, namely the close interrelation between what affects us on a global and on a local level, it is essential for us to join forces in order to contribute to the sustainable and social development of African countries. This is not only our ethical duty as citizens of this planet, but also a way of preventing major disasters that will end up affecting us all, as is already the case. I would like to finish with some ideas proposed by some I consider to be important, appropriate in this context. Through them, they also remind us that an epistemology of the South must be based on three guidelines. The first, learning that the South exists. The second, learning to go south. And finally, learning from the South and with the South. Thank you for your kind attention. I hope you enjoyed the Congress, and that your contributions are applicable to practical realities and its social actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nasara. Thank you very much for being with us on behalf of the government of the Canary Islands. Thank you very much. And last but not least, the organizer of this conference and lead partner of the AMENET Jean Monnet Network, Dr. José Mella, from the Autonomous University of Madrid. Professor Mella has been co-organizing this conference with our Director of Cooperation, Javier de León Ledesma, who unfortunately hasn't been able to work with us on this project for the last couple of weeks because of personal reasons. Javier and José have done a fantastic job over this last year and a half. But also, I would also like to thank Dr. Yen Lam Gonzalez and Dr. Matias Gonzalez, who actually have worked with Dr. Mella over the last few weeks to make this conference reality. Thank you, Professor Mella, for organizing this conference and for relying on the University of Las Palmas to host this second international conference on integration. Thank you, Professor Mella.
Thank you, Vice Rector Cruet. Good morning to everybody. This international conference is part of a set of events organized by the Jean Monnet Network. AMENET is the abbreviation of Africa, Mediterranean, and Europe network. Is a network made up of 14 universities, 8 from Africa and 6 from Europe. Is made up of the University Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, the University Autónoma of Madrid, the University of Bradford, the University of Peloponnese, l'Université de Pau et des Pays de l'Adour, Barça School of Economics, University of Nouakchott, Al-Saridia, Université Cheikh Anta Diop de Dakar, Universidad de Jean Piaget de Cabo Verde, University of Ghana, Université protestante au Congo, en Kinshasa, l'Université évangélique en Afrique de Bukavu, et l'Université libre des pays des Grands Lacs à Goma. Et finalement aussi de l'Université Abdelmalek et Tsali de Tanger et Tétouan. Dans cet ensemble this part of AMENET is a pleasure for me to sincerely thank the University of Las Palmas of Gran Canaria, and in particular the Vice Rector Richard Coué, and the academic staff Javier de León, Matias González, and Jen Lam, for their strong support for the organization of this AMENET conference. Thanks also to the Vice Rector of the University Autónoma of Madrid, Carmela Calés, and her office service. Also, I thank to my colleague Luis Collado and the Secretary Esther Alarcón for their constant permanent support. This is a major activity supported by the European Commission. It brings academic partners and institutions together from the sub-Saharan countries, Mediterranean African countries, and Europe. It aims at improving EU-Africa cooperation and contributing to building sustainable societies in Africa in coordination with the European Union. This conference is the second one, and the third one will take place on February the 22nd and 23rd in Accra, Ghana, and the fourth will be held in springtime in Dakar, in Senegal. You all will have timely information about these coming events. You can also go to the AMENET webpage, www.amenet.eu, and please watch it at the bottom of the slide to be in touch. As said in the program of this event, the
I think we've got a slight problem with the connection of Professor Mella. Let's see if our technicians can actually sort it out with him. Jorge? Okay. So, Professor. We are waiting for Professor Mella to connect again. He apparently had a problem with his connection. Let's just wait for a few seconds. Well, video conferences, that sometimes happens. It's not a problem. We have given ourselves plenty of time, as you can see, because the next session is at 10 o'clock. And that's what we normally tend to do when we've got online conferences. We just tend to give ourselves plenty of time because this normally happens. Well, just maybe a few words before we manage to connect with Professor Mella. Dr. Matias González Hernández will be the chair of the first plenary session after this opening ceremony. The session starts actually at 10 o'clock, so we've got some time, so we might all have a break before starting again and connecting, let's say, at 10 to 10. And basically, I'd just like to wait for our lead project manager. The important person to present the project has unfortunately not been able to connect again, but, well, what we're going to do, please allow me to officially declare the second international conference on regional integration open. And what I will suggest, Professor Mella, is that just before 10 o'clock, maybe at 10 to 10, he can give us a few words and just finish what he wanted to tell us before the next session. Thank you very much to all of you for participating in this opening ceremony. Thank you wholeheartedly to Carmela and Nasara for being with us. And we'll be in touch over the next 2 days, obviously. And again, I wish you all a very fruitful 2-day conference. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. But yes, good morning again. Sorry for this interruption, but let's resume the presentation of the organizer of this conference and lead partner of the AMENET Germany network, Dr. José Mella from the Autonomous University of Madrid. Please, Dr. Mella.
Thank you, Vice Rector Richard Clouet. Good morning to everybody. This international conference is part of a set of events organized by the Jean Monnet Network. AMENET is the abbreviation of Africa, Mediterranean and Europe Network. It is a network made up of 14 universities, 8 from Africa and 6 from Europe. The University of El Cadre Sadi de Tanger-Tétouan, the University of Bradford, the University of Peloponnese, Université de Pau et des Pays de la Loire, Warsaw School of Economics, University of Nouakchott Al Saïdia, Université Cheikh Anta Diop de Dakar, Universidad de Jean Piaget de Cabo Verde, University of Ghana, Université protestante au Congo, de Kinshasa, Université évangélique en Afrique, Bukavu, et l'Université libre des pays des Grands Lacs, à Goma. As lead partner of AMENET, it is a pleasure for me to sincerely thank to the Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, in particular to the Vice Rector Richard Clouet and the academic staff Javier de León, Matías González, and Jen Lang for their strong support for the organization of this AMENET conference. Thanks also to the Vice Rector of the University Autónoma of Madrid and her office service, to my colleague Luis Collado and the Secretary Esther Alarcón. This conference is a major activity supported by the European Commission. It brings academic partners and institutions together from the sub-Saharan countries, Mediterranean African countries, and Europe. It aims at improving EU-Africa cooperation with the European Union. This conference is the second one. The third will take place on February 22nd and 23rd in Accra, Ghana, and the fourth will be held in springtime in Dakar, Senegal. You all will have the timely information about these coming events. You can also go to the AMENET webpage, www.amenet.eu, or please watch it at the bottom of the slide. As said in the program of these events, the rationale of this conference is based on 3 pillars: tourism, climate change, and economic integration. Pillars which nowadays represent serious challenges. Therefore, they need to be profoundly reconsidered for achieving a human and sustainable development. Firstly, tourism in Africa is quite demanding. It needs to integrate renewable energy for electrification, sanitation for a better health, water for irrigation, infrastructures for a fluid transport mobility, coastal protection against extreme weather events, and sustainable use of land for the tourism quality. Secondly, it must be underlined that the climate change and the COVID pandemic are threatening the tourism development. Climate change is creating worse weather conditions such as heat waves, erosion, floods, droughts, ecosystem destructions, food insecurity, and water unavailability. Tourism is under unprecedented economic impact. It's one of the sectors most negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's affecting the economies of most countries, reducing their activity, their exports, their employment, their services, and the livelihoods of millions of people in Africa. Figures show that as many as 100 million direct tourism jobs are in danger, in addition to sectors associated with tourism, as food services. Women, who make up over 50% of the tourism workforce, along with young and workers in the informal economy, are among the most vulnerable employees. Due to the COVID-19, the sudden fall in tourism cuts off funding for biodiversity, conservation, and wildlife. It has already led to a rise in poaching, looting, and in consumption of bush meat, partly due to the decreased presence of tourists. In many African destinations, wildlife accounts for up to 80% of visits, and 90% of countries have closed World Heritage sites with immense socioeconomic consequences for communities relying on tourism. Further, 90% of museums are closed, and it's reckoned that 13 of them may never reopen. The COVID-19 crisis is a watershed moment to align the effort of sustaining livelihoods depending on tourism to ensure a more resilient, inclusive, carbon neutral, and a more human future. Thirdly, it's obvious that all these challenges need international cooperation among countries from the south and from the north, from Africa and from Europe. This idea is just the true core of AMENET's program. There is no option. The future of Europe depends on the future of Africa up to a point that we can say that without the development of Africa, the future of Europe is at risk by aging, at risk by a lack of young people, and at risk by massive flows of migrants and refugees, and so on and so forth. This is the main, more than ever before, I would say, that the implementation of that idea requires economic, social, and political integration between Europe and Africa to fight against all sorts of populism, nationalism, jihadism, violence, and intolerance. Europe and Africa need a new paradigm of understanding, which means interdependence, not dependence, collaborative governance, and to harness the factual consequences of COVID-19, which emphasize the proximity and the neighborhood of Europe and Africa as an advantage to trade and invest in mutual interests. Don't forget that the Africa, Mediterranean, and Europe region will have 3,000 million of people in 2015, most of them living in Africa. Africa urgently needs a roadmap to transform its tourism sector. It needs to take action in 3 priority areas. 1, advance a digital transformation of tourism, investing in digital skills, particularly for workers temporarily without jobs and for job seekers, to overcome the increasing digital inequality. 2, foster a green growth to shift towards a resilient, resource-efficient, and carbon-neutral tourism sector. Green investments for recovery could target protected areas, renewable energy, smart buildings, and the circular economy, among other opportunities. And 3, ensure tourism's restart, and recovery, putting people first, and work to ease and lift travel restrictions in a responsible and coordinated manner. As the World Tourism Organization said, our motivation is moving ahead together through collective action and international cooperation. We are stronger to embrace local and universal values and create decent jobs opportunities without leaving no one behind. This is our AMENET's goal and our commitment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Mella. So after this opening session, I would like to hereby declare the second International Conference on Regional Integration open. And I will now give the floor to the chair of the first plenary session, Dr. Matias González Hernández. Thank you very much to all of you, and I wish you all a very fruitful two-day conference. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, our dear Vice Rector, and also thanks a lot to our audience, many of them students at our universities, probably very interested in knowing more about this neighbor, but in many aspects unknown continent, which is Africa. So today we are talking about, we are talking with some colleagues and friends about a relevant issue, which is what are the specificities of the impacts of climate change in Africa, especially in the nearest part of the continent, and also which are the potential of tourism to giving to local communities and effective tools to build resilience against the climate change. So for this conversation, we have with us Noemi Padrón. She's senior lecturer at the University of La Laguna and member of the Ashotel University of La Laguna Chair on Tourism. Good morning, Noemi. Well, we have also José Naranjo. José Naranjo is journalist specialized in African affairs over the last at least 2 decades, and over the last, I think, 8-10 years living in Dakar, one of my favorite cities all over the world. Joking. So we have also Carmelo León, the director of the UNESCO Chair on Tourism and Sustainable Development of the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. He has participated in many development projects with African partners from Morocco to Senegal, also in Cabo Verde, etc. And we have also, but I think he's coming now, Sergio Moreno, who is also a member of the TIDES Institute of ULPG. And finally, let me introduce myself, Matias González, also member of TIDES, and I will be the moderator of this roundtable. So let's start with I can plan this 90-minute like a friendly conversation amongst friends about this issue in order to heat the environment for the following part of the conference. Let's start asking you about what do you think is specific, different in the way in which climate change is affecting societies in Africa. For example, Pepe, surely you have seen the terrible impacts of erosion throughout the coast of St. Louis and many other places in Senegal, maybe. What is going on there in St. Louis, for example? Can you tell us experience about?
Well, good morning, and thank you, Matias. Thank you, all of you, to invite me to this conference. Well, climate change and its consequence, well, represent a huge challenge for the world. But I think if there is a continent where the impact of this phenomenon is already being suffered, this is Africa. No? It is also terribly paradoxical because Africa suffers from it, but is the one that causes it the least in terms of CO2 emissions and nocively gases for the atmosphere, no? Given its low industrialization. It's true, in my travels and journalistic coverage in Africa, I have had the opportunity to see this impact firsthand. This year, there were major floods throughout the western and central area with hundreds of deaths and more than 1 million victims. Countries such as Senegal, Burkina Faso, Mali, Sudan, or Niger. Yes, it is the wet season. It rains every year, but experts agree that what they call extreme storm happens more and more frequently. Rainfall of great intensity located at specific points and in a very, very short time. No? These violent rains are not good for the countryside because they can negatively affect crops. But if they fall in urban areas or on the outskirts of cities where thousands of people settle every year from the countryside, the consequences are catastrophic. The lack of urban planning and the scarce anticipation of this type of episodes are behind the loss of human life. No? It may seem like a paradox, but it is not. The same area that suffers extreme rains suffers from a serious drought problem also. I talk a lot with the communities and the elderly, and they usually tell me the enormous difference between 50 years ago and now in terms of rainfall. This impacts in places where cereals are grown and are very dependent on rain. It generates poverty, hunger, and suffering, and more rural exodus towards the periphery of big cities. No, it's like a vicious circle. And as you say, Matthias, very evident also in the entire African Atlantic coastline is the problem of coastal erosion and rising sea levels. You know, the city of St. Louis in northern Senegal is a paradigmatic example. Although other factors such as disorderly construction on the coast or human intervention come together, no one doubts that the sea is rising. 70 years ago, French troops marched on a beach that was hundreds of meters wide, and today there is no trace of that sand, and the sea hits the houses in every storm. The situation also of the island of Gorée, where the effect of coastal erosion is also being felt, and St. Louis, a World Heritage Site, threatened by the waters, bring us directly to this topic of tourism and his relation with the climate change. There is another countries like the drought that hit Zimbabwe. You know, we have a lot of countries and a lot of issues linked to this climate change and progress with tourism also.
Impacting picture of you have drawn of the impact of climate change in some places in Africa that you know very well. So I would like to ask Carmelo now and Sergio later about their experience of working in projects in Africa, especially in southern Morocco and in the Saloum River Delta, where I remember being almost 50 kilometers far from the shoreline and still 1 meter height from sea level. So seawater flooding due to sea level rise is obvious, salting aquifers and croplands, and diminishing the opportunities to have food for surviving for local people and of course to support tourism development. Carmelo, what do you remember of your experience in Senegal, in Morocco, and what can you say to complete this picture of the impact of climate change in that continent?
Good morning, Matthias. Thank you. I agree with all the arguments that the previous panelists have argued related to the potential climate change impacts in Africa. There are many assets in Africa that are going to be damaged because of climate change. These assets, the natural assets, environmental assets, are are going to be changed because of climate change. And they are also very important for these societies to generate income. The economies are based on these assets, the forests, the ecosystems. These are important sources of income for these countries, and they are going to be affected by climate change. Not only the sea level rise, the changes in biodiversity is going to be very important, and many countries are based, they living in tourism. Tourism is an important source of income for these countries in Africa, because the growth in tourism along the last years has raised a lot of opportunities for development to bring people out of poverty. So it is a great challenge for tourism in this region. It's known that Africa is not already an important receptor of tourism. It shares 5% of the global international tourism, but the potential for growth and the significance in terms of the contribution to the welfare of these societies is going to be threatened because of this change in the attributes of the destinations. As you mentioned, Matthias, this sea level rise in the coastal zones is going to cause beach erosion and reduction in the beaches that tourists experience. And tourists are very sensitive to these changes in the natural assets, and there are going to be changes in the flow of tourism. Also, the increase in the temperature, the average temperature, is going to be made to make the conditions for the pleasant tourism more difficult in some areas of Africa. And this is an important impact on the decisions that tourists will make in the future about destinations in Africa. The dependence on natural resources means a lot of vulnerability in terms of the economic decisions that economic agents can take and will have consequences for the economies and societies of these regions. There is a lot of research to be done in this area about the impact of climate change in Africa. It's known that the European Union is developing models to analyze the impact of climate change in the European Union, but there is need of a more regional assessment of the impacts of climate change in the key sectors that are the main sources of income in the African regions. And not all the African regions are going to be affected by the same standards. Some of them are going to have more consequences than others, but in general, the impacts are going to be very important. Yes, Matthias.
Noemi, what do you think? I mean, tourism is going to be affected by climate change in a particular way in Africa. I mean, it's trending much more, affecting much more than in the past, because you have in the past some other threats like diseases, infectious diseases, and so on. But now increased because of the climate change. What can be done in tourism planning, Noemi, to try to get more resilient tourist development against the climate change impact in Africa? What is your perspective about?
Okay.
Noemi?
Good morning, Matthias. Now you can hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Perfect. Thank you for the organization for having me here in this interesting event about the impacts of climate change, which are not only limited to the African coast or to the African continent, but it's climate change is showing its worst phase all over the world. not only because of possible pandemic linked to the spread of this type of diseases, but also because we have already seen during many years, currently and many years in the past, that climate change is changing the life and the livelihood of many communities all over the world. So climate change has it's not a threat anymore. It's here and it's happening. Nothing is going to stop it. Nothing is going to stop the heating of the planet. Nothing is going to stop the increase in intensity of many events we are currently seeing. And science are advancing. And the only thing we can do is try to think, how to model or how to shape new development paths that could lead us to, of course, first of all, not suffering climate change as it could be if we do nothing, and on the other hand, to balance in many ways the way we live and we obtain income from our natural resources in order to, to be less vulnerable or to be more resilient to climate change impacts. I totally agree with Carmelo Leon thought about the link of tourism to natural resources. Tourism value change has become really complex, has become really sophisticated. I currently say very often that tourism has become a very systemic sector because of its global supply chain, not only connecting the demand, tourists from different origins to destinations all over the world, but the supply side of the tourism industry has become globalized in such a way that, as we see now, the pandemic can really stop the generation of income or development in many countries and in many regions of the world that are intensively dependent on tourism flows. I don't have to talk about Canary Islands economy right now and the crisis we are facing because of the pandemic limitation of traveling and how the region can suffer not only this year but in the incoming years because of the paralyzation of this economic sector. So tourism is becoming a really systematic sector. Tourism, especially in destinations and in very vulnerable destinations, are very linked, or is a sector that is very linked to its natural resources, to its temperature, to its climate conditions, to its climate security. So tourism is a very, very natural sector, as opposite to our vision of a very urban and very unlinked sector to nature. So climate change can really become a threat to tourism. Can we turn the coin? Can we think about how tourism can become more or can give a more stable development to many regions of the world, or can tourism strengthen communities, local communities, in order to obtain income but also to be able to adapt to climate change impacts? I think so. I think tourism has a big role in rural communities, in small communities, in very non-developed, not really developed regions of the world currently. but it really has to change its focus. Tourism, as we see it now, has become an industry to generate income to big firms, to big hotel chains, to massive tourism flows, or to the ones who benefit to massive tourism flows. So it's not an industry oriented to the local population, or even oriented to protect those natural resources that, you know, sustain the life of the communities. So the industry all over the world has to, and this will be my last sentence to give the first word to my other colleagues. Tourism has to change the focus from, you know, a really rent seeking and rent extraction industry from natural resources to an industry that can really, you know, sustain, protect not only the natural resources in the region, but also their communities and their social way of living. Thank you, Matthias.
Sergio, let's turn to a more experiential vision of the impact of climate change in Africa. You have been there several times. And you have seen the wide range of natural, cultural resources that can put in value to develop tourism experiences. But also you have seen the vulnerability of those natural resources. What do you think from the perspective of your own experience while visiting Africa about this issue of climate change affecting the global society, but particularly tourism activities in Africa?
Yeah, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a few minutes with all of you. And answering to your question, it's quite complex to talk about Africa, right? In a way that we can assure that vulnerability is huge in this continent. According to some studies, 7 out of the top 10 countries affected by climate change are in Africa. So basically we can assure that the entire continent is very affected by climate change. But then in terms of tourism, there are many important differences, because we have different countries that are facing different cycles, or they are at different levels in those cycles. It's hard to compare, let's say, Egypt or Morocco or South Africa, what are very developed countries in terms of tourism, even with different models, but obviously tourism is very well developed, and other countries where tourism is still absent or is an emerging industry. So considering all that complex situation, we have to deal with climate change. And one initial thought I would like to put on the table is that we have to deal with a dual problem here. From one point, Africa has a very important positioning problem. The entire world knows Africa with different associations related to negative connotations. So in terms of tourism, that means that this continent hasn't been growing at the same level as the same level of other parts of the world because of that positioning problem. And at the same time, climate change has also quite a positioning problem as a topic, in a way that considering what we call the absent agent, I mean, nobody is really the active agent, but it's a passive situation that nobody, let's say, is finally responsible of climate change. So all those conditions, the positioning, branding problem of Africa, and the positioning, branding problem of climate change as a topic, altogether, that makes the situation quite complex in terms of vulnerability in Africa. So in order to deal with this situation, obviously, besides the classic mitigation, adaptation, and so on policies, I think research can also add some guidelines, because obviously if we talk about climate change, we have to consider emissions. If we think about traveling to Africa, then we are obviously taking into account air transportation. And so how can we help with tourism when we are contributing to climate change or traveling to the continent? Well, that means we need new metrics in a way that the final balance must be positive. So that means that we need metrics in order to make sure that we are making a contribution, a net final contribution, when we travel to the continent. And in order to develop those metrics, we need to obviously work with different perspectives besides the economic perspective, and include all the social sustainability, environmental metrics in a balance, and make that final positive balance explicit, so we can make clear that for both the residents and the tourists, there is a well-being contribution. So that's one initial idea I would like to share. Thank you.
So all of you already have exposed your initial points about this issue. I would like to say that it could be nice if you interrupt each other, if you have something to point in a moment of the speech of our colleague, in order to make this conversation a little bit more dynamic from now on. At the end of this first round, I would like to ask Jorge if it is possible to give the voice, and of course ask permission to Stroma, if she is now available to make a short speech about an aspect that she's very specialist, because she's in this conference to speak about gender and tourism, but I know that he has published a lot on water and tourism, and maybe Stroma would like to say something to us about how the particularities of climate change in Africa can affect the provision of water, which is a very important asset in tourism industry. So could you say something, Mr. Stroma? Would you like, or prefer not say nothing? Thank you so much. I think it was not prepared, sorry. So.
Well, Matthias.
Yeah.
I think gender will play.
Are you hearing? No, sorry. Stroma, are you hearing? No, Stroma. Jorge, can you give Stroma?
Yes.
Oh.
Sorry. My mic wasn't on.
Okay.
Yes, about water, critical asset in tourism, but also a critical asset for communities. And I think that the point I would make, wherever you are in the world, whether it be, you know, the Canaries or Africa or Indonesia or wherever it is, it's about the equitable share of that resource. All right, and it's ensuring that when tourism is developed, it's not taking the resource away from communities. And my research just shows that the present way of planning and developing tourism very rarely takes into consideration water as an essential asset. Very few geologists and hydrologists are employed when it comes to planning tourism developments, and the carrying capacity of water is the last to be remembered when they're making these plans. And it's kind of like a slow crisis, a slow death. Because, you know, those underground, they normally use underground water resources, and they get sucked out slowly and surely until, oh dear, there isn't any left, and you hit a crisis point. And you might think that this is only a problem in drier climates, but actually it's also a problem in tropical climates because they're not collecting water and reusing water. Developments are going on around the world now as we speak that are not optimizing water recycling schemes. They're not reusing water, they're not collecting water, they're using the cheap, free, supposedly underground resource because it's the easiest and it requires the less consideration, thought, and upfront costs. So yeah, that's going to affect everywhere in the world, and it will particularly affect anywhere that's got, you know, increasingly water resources that are decreasing because of climate change. And, you know, somebody was talking earlier about places which at one time are flooding and at another time are in a drought condition, and that is precisely what water capture could be helping, but it needs to be included in the planning right from the beginning, and considerations of that need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for interesting contribution, and I think it's helped to give a more richer panoramic of the problem. And I would like to now to ask Pepe Naranjo on a question, which is, we have a problem with climate change, but many times local human interventions help climate change to make a disaster higher. For example, Pepe, if it is not true, please say me that. I think that in northern Senegal, in the land, the Barberie, and all about the dam of I don't remember the name. You know, some other intervention, the opening of the land and so on, have also contributed to create an environment that make almost impossible to survive in that area. So sometimes the negative synergies between global climate change impacts in the areas, but also not very well oriented human intervention there can lead to to worsen the situation. What do you think about the contribution of human intervention in northern Senegal to worsening the situation provoked by climate change?
I can answer. Yes.
Okay.
No, I mean, I would like to talk also about another issue. Well, it's human intervention also, but in another way, you know. We can talk about Saint Louis. We can talk about northern Senegal, but I think perhaps the idea I want to expose perhaps can contribute a little bit more to this conference, to this debate. I am sure that in these 2 days, you who are experts in tourism are going to go deep into these and other issues. But let me be a little bit like the black sheep of this meeting, no? Because I would like to talk about something linked. I think very linked to tourism and climate change and peace and security. You know, I have lived in West Africa for a decade, where I am, you know, correspondent for the newspaper El País. I am particularly determined to publish positive news about the continent. It is really my particular workhorse, trying to break the catastrophic and negative narrative that dominates Africa in the West. Trust me, it's not easy, but some battles are won. However, this effort to make Africa could be the focus space it deserves in the Western narrative cannot make us forget the enormous challenge of the continent, which, in relation to the development of a tourism industry that provides well-being and growth, have to do above all with peace and security. The crisis in Sahel, in my point of view, is paradigmatic once again. The pre-existing situation of poverty, the abandonment of large areas by the states, and the exploitation of the resource by foreign actors is now joined by the penetration of radical groups that take advantage of these weaknesses and have put all regional stability on the ropes. You know so well what I am talking about, so I don't want to talk a lot, but I just put one example. In 2015, 2016, the so-called refugee crisis in Europe happened when 1 million people, mostly Syrians, but also Africans, landed off the shores of Greece. 1 million people who had to be absorbed by 26 countries, the European countries, where 450 million people live, one of the richest areas in the world. However, that generated a social and political earthquake of enormous dimensions, in addition to showing all the lack of solidarity of which we in Europe are capable. Well, Burkina Faso is one of the poorest countries in the world, with 20 million inhabitants. Today has the same number of internally displaced people, IDP, people who have lost their homes due to the violence. But many people do not know this because they do not make the front page of the newspaper or open the television news. Mali and Niger also suffer from this scourge that extends to the north of the Ivory Coast, Benin, Ghana, and Togo. The north of Nigeria is shaken by violence, as the south of Chad, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Somalia. In northern Mozambique, the situation in Cabo Delgado worries also. It is true that there are also positive developments, such as peace in Sudan, but the general outlook is not very optimistic. That's why the African Union Summit last year was held under the slogan, "Let's put down the weapons." Because they know that without peace and stability, there will be no development, there will be no tourism. There is so much scientific literature on whether the conflicts between farmers and pastoralists that spread across the Sahel of northern Nigeria are related to climate change. But what is clear is that it rains less, there is less pasture, the pastoralists must go farther or seek new land, and they may conflict with sedentary farmers. You don't have to be a scientist to understand this logic. Peace and security, I finish, peace and security are the essential prerequisite for tourism. The fight to try to alleviate the consequence of climate change as well, although it would be more interesting if we could force those who provoke it to take this problem seriously, because I assure you that in Africa it is no joke. But the exclusively military response is not effective. Only a combination of endogenous development coupled with increasingly conscious and less predatory investment will make this dream possible. I know African countries are working hard, for example, with the Continental Free Trade Agreement that is very, very important for the future in the immediately future, still in its infancy, but very, very hopeful, because it lays the foundation of industrialization, key to generating employment, and of free trade with a huge market for goods and services. It's a good sign. It's a sign that Africa is going to have a lot to say in the immediate future, and more if they work together. I think that's very important for the development and for the tourism, but we cannot forget the issue of stability, peace, and security in Africa if we want to talk about tourism.
Actually, so I think that you have opening some interesting windows to, to a wider perspective of the African problems and barriers to African development. It could be interesting, not just in climate change, but also in other issues that at the very end are all of them connected to draw a global picture of what Africa is now. But could be interesting also a reflection on which part of the responsibilities are coming from the external agents, but others depend on the internal institutions and social organization, political organization. And maybe, usually do you like to say something about these things? Maybe you would like to say something now about external, internal responsibilities and how to the possibilities to create an international consensus with Africa in the center to successfully try to get a deal, but the effective deal to go in a good way in the future. Would you say something?
Well, I think there are important steps being done to include African countries, not only in the international negotiations for climate change agreements in different levels, in different sectors. I think the European Union, has taken a big step in including Africa also on all the research funds for the new generation of the Horizon program. To my knowledge, nowadays, many, hundreds of institutions all over Europe, research institutions, education institutions are, linking their efforts to research and to educational organizations, all over the continent, not only in South Africa or in the more, developed countries, but also to more, humble or institutions that have really local knowledge, local connections to their own governing processes in order to, to face the future challenges like climate change, like social inequality, like gender issues, like new industrial development linked to not connected networks. So I think the new decade or the new decades can be a big opportunity for Africa to stand, or to African countries to stand and be more active in defining new rules and in defining new flows of technological development or R&D for their own future. And as it is showing, or the data shows that Africa is doing, or many African countries are, bridging their underdeveloped states to the new digitalization and the new intelligence and communication technologies. They are bridging their own bridge to the future, to empowering communities, to empowering women, to empowering, social marginalization in their own countries through very innovative and very, local knowledge processes that can be, pushed by these, international or these more European and other more developed countries' efforts to, to push these innovative processes. Is that what you expected to hear, Matthias?
But I would like also to, because you have spoken on empowerment and maybe and the necessity of introduce a different perspective of the development process in a more bottom-up way, in a more centered in communities. I would like to hear from Stroma again, because I know that she also has working on empowerment and community-based strategies. Stroma, do you think that in some extent the problem is also a problem of perspective, of changing the way in which the different agents, local and international, national, are related to each other and empowering local communities? Please.
Yeah, so I think that I don't want to preempt my keynote, but I think an awful lot of it comes down to what you really mean by empowerment. Because if you're talking about empowerment in the sense that, for example, the UNWTO talks about empowerment, I don't think of that as empowerment. If you most of the international organizations are actually talking about, when they talk about empowering women, they're talking about giving women jobs. And I don't think that giving women jobs, we've got plenty of jobs anyway, thanks. We don't actually need your badly paid, low-end, bottom of the ladder jobs in tourism. And actually what they're seeking to do is to bring down wage rates for both men and women by putting more people in the workforce. And it's just a neoliberal approach to increasing workforces. And it's very little about power. And I think the key to the word empowerment is in the, is the power part of that. and giving people jobs is not giving them power. And I think that as with so many of these things, it is about a question of power and how we understand power and how we give power to the people that need it to be able to have agency in their own lives.
Well, Matthias, I would like to thank Stroma for her powerful thought about the weakness of tourism development. Indeed, the tourism industry is a very intensive, it's a very labor-intensive industry, and it's also very intensive in low-paid and in low education or in low professional skills. So tourism has given, of course, a very important first step for women all over the world. I could say that, for example, in Spain, the main source of, of the process of women incorporation to the labor market has been the tourism industry all over the world, all over the country. So regions with tourism development has the highest activity rate for women in the country, and this has helped during the last decades, for women to enter the job market, to increase their education. Of course, what we are seeing now is there are very powerful barriers, which are common in all over the economy. So we are not represented in the decision-making process. We are all overrepresenting, or women are overrepresented in low skills activities. They have more difficulties to develop a professional career because of stereotypes and because of ceiling barriers to their professional career. But I think that tourism has to make, the industry has to make its own evaluation of the problems and of the barriers, and put more powerful tools to correct these imbalances. But tourism can be, either through labor or either through community involvement, a big opportunity for women. We have to recognize that.
I totally agree, Naomi.
So this is again an invitation to hear the presentation from Stroma, but could be short after this roundtable. And now I would like to turn to Sergio, because a couple of minutes ago Pepe said that denounced the negative narrative that dominates in relation to Africa, all over the world, the damn continent, something like that, and Sergio is also a specialist in the role of narratives, in perceptions, images, in how people build their images of destination and then take decisions. Sergio, what can be done? I mean, because maybe this negative narrative is not based on objective data to some extent, because maybe it's not more insecure to walk around in Dakar, for example, than in many places maybe in Europe even, or other places in Latin America and so on that have a more tourist development. That can be done from this perspective to give a different narrative, to provide a different perspective that what Africa is from the security point of view, including security against maybe against extreme climate events and so on. What can be done?
No doubt. Well, healthy destinations, I'm talking here about safety and security, it's a basic requirement to develop tourism, that's for sure. But we have to consider that safety and security is a perception. And we go back to the positioning problem. Pepe was talking about that, and I also did in my first intervention, that Africa is associated with very negative connotations in general in most of the developing countries. The point is that the role of tourism can change those connotations. And I'll try to make my point here. The tourists, they are looking for healthy bubbles when they travel. And let's say successful destinations like Egypt, for instance, they have those resorts, those bubbles where people can feel safe if, let's say, the social conditions are fine. However, that's an industrial way, an industrial approach to tourism. And what we need are healthy bubbles that are at the micro local scale, empowering other values and identities and providing, again, a net benefit to the tourist. And we have to work on that. That's not easy at all, but that's our challenge. One point, for instance, to work in order to develop that healthy bubbles is fostering diaspora tourism, because those are the main agents to connect, let's say, Africa and the developed and the well-developed countries. Those are the main agents that can explain and connect those two realities. So that's one very important issue we should be working on. Another important issue here is international routes in Africa, because once you develop international mobility, then you can connect realities that are very different in the continent, but the tourists can approach the continent with different eyes. And if they travel from one country, one destination to another, they also have a different perception of security and safety. So that's why there is a need to develop international routes, theme routes in Africa in order to deal with this positioning problem. And at the same time, those routes are enablers to develop new products and transform resources into products and experiences. In order to generate that process, we have to get out of that bubble. That's why we need international routes to connect those realities. And this is also the way to make the local population more relevant, because otherwise, if we consider climate change, obviously they have to migrate because the conditions are going worse and worse. So in order to fight against this migration problem, developing tourists, people can route into destinations, empower themselves, as you were talking about women a few minutes ago. So that's why it's so important to develop those healthy bubbles, and from those healthy bubbles to connect dots and to make international routes. So the international position of Africa as a destination can evolve and be more positive. And finally, that diaspora issue, that it's self-explanatory, because obviously connect people with the roots, and you don't have a close link with the continent, eventually you will get there. And that it's a very powerful concept in terms of tourism. Going back to your roots, going back to the region, right? So that's also a powerful idea to work from the tourism perspective at the very end. So those are some of my 2 pennies about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting contribution. It was a pity that in 5 seconds it was a little bit interrupted, but I think we all took the global sense of your contribution. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So Carmelo León is the leader of the UNESCO chair on tourism and sustainable development, and have carried on some projects, I think more than 10, 12, 15, I don't know exactly, maybe 20 different projects in different countries, most of them related to tourism. And I think it's the time here to focus on the potentiality of tourism to give tools to local communities to face in a better way the challenges of the climate change. Carmelo, from your experience in the projects and what have you read and participate in projects in Africa, which lessons have you learned about how tourism can provide tools to make people more resilient in Africa, and then to come to climate change, and then which has been changed in the way in which funding and projects are now oriented in order to make them more effective to strengthen the potentiality of tourism to provide sustainable development in Africa. What do you think about these two aspects?
Sergio has mentioned, and also Noemi and other panelists, tourism as an industry in Africa is not a high-profile industry. It's been developed in a very basic way, and it needs to appropriate capacities and capabilities, and there is need a lot of capacity development, a lot of skills, technological breakthroughs, and looking at ways of implementing the appropriate technology, the appropriate combination of techniques and process of development to the conditions and the social characteristics and the environmental conditions that societies have. Because most of the time what developers perceive as an objective is to extrapolate models which have been successful in other latitudes of the world to these developing countries, and they fail because they are not adapted, they are not the appropriate technology, the appropriate way of doing tourism. And what is needed is to strengthen the capacities of these societies to build by themselves a sustainable development process. And this is what we have tried to help in our development projects, developing projects, sustainable development projects in natural areas in these countries in the Northern Africa, in Senegal, in Morocco, in Mauritania. We have been trying to to convey the interest of local population to get engaged in the process of development, so they become actors of their own developmental processes and rising the welfare for these populations. So it's very relevant to find out who are the leaders. What is the leadership? Because any society needs leadership. The models which are implemented planted from abroad, they are not going to be successful. And what we have to find out is matching the demand, the preferences, this needed profile that Sergio mentioned, the security aspects, the safety aspects, the conditions of health conditions, the sewage, all the cleanliness, and all these issues that tourists are interested, adapted to the development process that these societies endow in their cultural and historical backgrounds and heritages. So these should be matched together. The design is very important, design process, innovation by design, doing new things, trying to produce products which are original and successful, not replicate other models which have been successful in other countries, which most of the time don't fail. But for that, it's very needed to develop capacity processes by involving all the stakeholders, so that this bottom-up approach leads to improved performance by increasing capacity, which make the systems work better, more efficient, more effectively, designing objectives to be achieved by society and building constructive and successful societies, where the rule of law is also an important issue, abandoning corruption and all these practices that are handicaps for development. So what we have found, answering to your question, is that the way that tourism is practiced or is implemented is very basic, because there is a lot of lack of planning, of vision, of what we want for the destination, and it's very difficult to advance in those circumstances. There is need a common ground project in which everyone in society believes, all the institutions coordinated at its different levels, from the national government to the regional governments to the local governments, with the ultimate objectives of changing the lives of these societies. Of course, there are many problems and restrictions, but they can be bypassed by working through this capacity development, taking the advantages of the local actors and local governments in stimulating and changing, leading to changes in institutional frameworks that facilitate true participation and building consensus that mobilize all these resources which are needed for sustainability, where equity, the balancing of developing and conservation with all the resources of society, integrating gender issues and all the people who can be left behind of these processes is very important. Sometimes these projects what they do is to generate some sort of ghettos, tourism ghettos, where tourists go there and don't interact with society, and there are not much multiplier effects across society, because tourism is not developed in the right way to make a dynamic process of change of the activities, artisan activities, agricultural activities, services activities that society produces, all the historical and cultural heritage that can be offered as a service to tourists. Tourists want to visit a destination because they find something attractive, so they have to focus on those things which make them different and build upon these issues, these capacities, these resources in order to make them good and successful products. So the failure most of the time is a failure of human management, and linked also to some sort of exploitation. We have to say that Africa is the worst, is the least developed area of the world. Many countries are lagging behind. They are at the bottom of the development process. And as you know, there's an increasing inequality between the countries which are growing faster than the countries which are lagging behind. And these countries are in Africa. So this is something that some institutions of global cooperation, earlier, Noemi mentioned the European Union, at last, is interested in doing some research in Africa. Somebody has to take care of this continent, because it's an explosive bomb that sometimes could cause a problem for humanity, because it's a shame that this is lagging behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmelo. Thank you so much. I'm sure that Pepe Naranjo would like to counterpoint some aspects of the intervention from Carmelo. And now we are pointing to the finish of this conversation. So, Pepe, would you like to say something about this? I mean, I would like to hear from you also 2 or 3 concrete things that you would change in tourism performing in order to improve the tourism contribution to the social, environmental, and economic development of African countries. Also, if you can provide us 2 or 3 things that you would change. Thank you.
Thank you again. I think this is the last intervention. In my experience, I agree, tourism in Africa can reduce poverty, can do a lot for the development of different countries. But in my point of view, the industry needs help to increase his importance in the, mainly in countries not like South Africa or not like Egypt, as Sergio has talked about, or perhaps in Morocco, where you can see that industry more or less developed. But there is a lot of countries where we have so many problems. I would like to just to talk a little bit about, the infrastructure problems, road infrastructures, airport issues also, and the question of the aerial mobility is, I think, in the central position if we want to talk about the tourism industry in Africa. Also, I think we have to start to talk more about different areas in Africa and not to talk about Africa as an unity, because I think that can make we go into wrong positions. But yes, I have the potentialities there. That's evident. But there is a lot of way to walk to arrive to see the tourism as a central industry in several countries, at least in West and Central Africa. I think that's the challenge.
Where we are also, I would like to hear something about some concrete aspect, like water, health, and tourism in Africa, and particularly what a well-planned tourism development can contribute to increase water provision security for local people. For example, helping, to increase different sources or by water treatment and increase the health conditions around and so on. concrete aspects in which, in the context of climate change, tourism can help local societies to deal better with water issues. Noemi, something concrete, and maybe if you like Stroma, but you have 2-3 minutes, better than 3.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. I will be very short and specific to the issue you are raising. I think Africa in the next, I'm not an expert on tourism development in the area or, energy, water. I know a little, but I have collaborated in a few projects with the ITC, the Technological Institute of the Canary Islands, and they have, during the past 20 years, they have developed very, very interesting projects on renewable energy in local communities, disconnected communities to the networks in Africa. And, energy provision or energy production in Africa will double by renewable energy or triple in the next 10 years. That will give them a big opportunity to produce water locally, either by desalination or either by, pumping water from local aquifers. So I expect that water and energy will be, we will have a really big push by renewable energy production. And there are many experts that say that Africa could be exporting energy to Europe in the next 10 years, maybe a quarter of European energy needs can be covered by renewable energy production. So I will say that this will be an explosion, especially for the North African countries in the next years.
Thank you.
Stroma, would you like to add something to this?
Naomi's raised a very important point about the water energy nexus, but I think that the energy side of that nexus has been far better developed than the water side. It actually takes a huge amount of energy to desalinate water, and there are also quite a lot of negative environmental impacts as a result of desalinating water. What do you do with the salt that's produced, and where does it go? So I don't think that it's just, I think that raises questions. But on the point about tourism and water, where you have tourists, there must be piped water. Tourists will only the very, very most hardy of tourists. So when there is tourism, there is piped water, and that piped water can also be for local communities. So there is plenty of examples around the world where water, which was systems which were developed because tourism was being developed, which have been hugely beneficial to local communities. So I think that tourism certainly has the potential for, Naomi's idea of local renewable energy projects in the communities, which can be supported by tourism or by tourism development is a great idea. I do think that the water energy nexus is something which has to be far more deeply researched and understood, because there's an absolute dearth of literature on the topic at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Stroma. And finally, maybe Sergio Carmelo, could you say something to say bye-bye to our audience, and in just 1-2 minutes?
Sure. From my side, I just would like to point out that tourism, climate change, and migration, those are global issues, and they are very much interconnected. But obviously, we have to at the local level. And in this case, it's very important to develop and to foster, because otherwise, if we take into account that in tourism we are now facing, let's say, the fourth wave in its development, that means we are in the knowledge wave, post-industrial wave, and the tourism is not still is not developed in some countries, in some regions in Africa. Those regions, they have to foster a double problem. They haven't developed tourism at all, and at the same time, their population is not ready for that. We are thinking about upskilling population here in our destinations, but in those parts, obviously, it's starting from zero, kind of. And if we don't work on those bubbles, what we get left are kind of environments words, superfluous inhabitants. And those superfluous inhabitants, because they are not connecting to the production system, obviously they have to migrate. They have no option. They poverty and no solution. So that's why we have to work on those bubbles as seeds in order to develop tourism with all those positive values and contribute from the tourism perspective to climate change and also to the migration problem. That's one final statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Carmelo, 2 minutes, not more than 2, please.
Yes, to summarize, it is never enough to emphasize the challenge and the threat that this global change on the climate is causing to different regions of the world, and is going to cause to Africa as well. This is an important challenge that there is need to address, and this is going to cause a lot of damages, a lot of problems to societies, and the laggardness that nowadays Africa is facing in the development process is going to be even more difficult because of climate change if nothing is done. So there is need to anticipate these problems and to do a lot of research to find out how these societies can adapt and can implement the appropriate measures collectively through a bottom-up approach, in participating in a sustainable and empowering way in order to achieve less damage from this problem. Tourism is going to be very much affected in different sectors and in different segments of the industry, and there is need to anticipate these damages and to take action right now. For instance, it's very important, although Africa is not a major contributor to lower CO2 and hydrocarbon emissions, there is need that also this continent adopt cleaner technologies and changes the emission to a more environmentally friendly working, in order that all work together towards the limiting of emissions. And this is also good for the conditions, human conditions of living, and also for attracting tourists who perceive that these measures are good in terms of the sustainability of tourist destinations.
Thank you very much, Carmelo. Thank you all the participants. Thank you. Thanks, Sergio, Stroma, José Naranjo, Carmelo, Noemi. Thank you to the audience also. I hope you are enjoying this time. I did. It's close to 11:30, which is the time in which Stroma is going to start her speech. I don't know if Jorge want now to make a break, or we continue with the next session of the conference. So, okay, well, now it's the time for Stroma to give us her presentation, her dissertation. It could be on gender and tourism. Of course, one of the most relevant issues in research, but also in practical politics and development. So I have to say I'm a follower of Stroma work. She has made very insightful contributions in different aspects of tourism research. But I knew that recently she has published with a woman that I know, Daniela Alarcón, a paper in Journal Sustainable Tourism about women and tourism. And I'm for sure that you all are going to enjoy very much the Stroma dissertation. So Stroma, thank you so much for coming with us this morning. And please go ahead when you like.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Are you seeing it?
I think not yet.
Not yet. Remind me which buttons to click. In the right. Oh, right. Okay, now you've given me the thing. Right. Is it? Are you seeing it now? And then.
Okay. Now.
Are you seeing it now?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. And then I just need to go there. Yep. Is that right now? Okay, lovely. So, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. And of course, we're all really sad that we're not actually there with you in a, on a sunny island, and instead I'm in rainy England alone in my office, and I'm really missing actually being able to talk to people one-to-one and have coffee breaks and share on a more informal level. Anyway, COVID-19 has reshaped our lives, and I'm going to have a little look towards the end of my presentation about how it's changing women's lives and what we can learn from that when it comes to coping with climate change. I'm an academic at the University of the West of England. I'm also a director of a charity, an NGO called Equality in Tourism, which focuses specifically on trying to make tourism more equal, more gender equal specifically. I'm going to talk about tourism and gender equality or inequality, and then look at some examples from Africa about what tourism can do for women, and then, as I say, look at COVID-19 and what we can learn from that. Whoop. One too many. Go back, sorry, just so that we're all on the same page about what I mean by gender equality. I'm talking about having the same opportunities, outcomes, rights and obligations. I'm talking about a world where men and women share equal distributions of power and influence, where they have equal opportunities to finance, where they have equal opportunities to setting up a business, and where they have equal opportunities for education, and importantly for their own personal ambitions. Okay, so gender equality is far more than how it's written about in or talked about by very many people, which seems to be about giving women all the burdens that men have without giving them the same place at the table to decide what's going to happen. Why gender equality in tourism? Well, just plain and simply because it's a human right, and we should all have our human rights agreed, allowed, accepted. All right. You can also look at it from the point of view of from a development perspective. If you change women's lives, it changes family fortunes and it changes society. There's plenty of evidence to suggest where women are educated, they have fewer children. Where they have fewer children and women invest in their daughters' education, that changes society. It's too long into the future. People can't wait 20 years to see those changes, and they're not very good at looking backwards and learning. So that argument doesn't get me terribly far either. However, if you put the argument from a business perspective and you show all the evidence about a gender balance in company productivity, in company reputation, if you show that when you treat women equally as men, you have a greater pool of talented workers, and that all the evidence suggests that if that gets as far as board level, then there is significant evidence that this affects your performance and competitiveness. It's also about being able to attract a greater consumer base, particularly when it comes to tourism. The vast majority of tourism purchase processes within families are made by the women in those families. And if you can enhance your reputation, you know, that is a good reason for businesses to listen. So those are some of the arguments that I make for the need for better gender equality in tourism. Okay. How do I do that? No. Yeah, all I'm seeing is my own screen now. So main window, right. So you tell me what you'd like me to do again. All right. Go home. Go in home. I've got live screen. All right. Yep. Is that working for you now? Screen share. Have you got it? Are we back? Okay, good. So I was just saying why gender equality in tourism was so important. Okay, if we look at the situation, right, in the world situation, of course, the world data is very hard to come by on these topics. But if we look at the major tourism companies, the global tourism companies, what you can see is that women only make up 25, but less than 25%, less than a quarter of the people on the boards, but we make up more than 50% of the workforce. If you look in hospitality, it's worse because we make up 70% of the workforce, but we hold less than 10% of board positions. We even hold less than a fifth of general management roles. So you can see that when you look in the top of these companies, women just aren't getting there. It's partly because of just downright discrimination by men. It's also due to occupational segregation. It's because women's roles are less valued. It's because we're stereotyped and therefore less likely to be promoted. We're actually averagely given less training than men are. We struggle more with work-life balance because despite working in productive labour, we're very rarely helped in our reproductive labour. And even when we do move up the ladder, what we find is that we are paid less than our male counterparts. In the UK, at least, that gap is getting worse, not better. And although in tourism it's not as bad as in other industries, I have to say, but even in tourism, you're looking at a 16% gap between what a man's paid and a woman's paid, despite them being equivalent roles. And this is on top of women working very long, unsociable hours, and their work being demanding both physically and emotionally. And the houseification of women's employment. This is something that Las Kellys in Spain talk about, the hard labour and doing jobs that are considered women's work because they're what a housewife does at home. And this representation of women as wives in the tourism industry just reproduces the existing gender subordination and reinforces the already unequal gender relations. Quite a lot of authors, when they write about gender equality in tourism, talk about a double burden. And the double burden is that on top of our reproductive labour is the labour that brings the next generation into being. And it's not only about pregnancy and childcare, but it's about nurturing and feeding and making sure kids get to school on time and picking them up and managing their social lives. And it's about the cleaning of the house so they grow up in a healthy environment. But and then it's also, you know, at the other end of the scale of looking after old people. And this is the role that women, you know, have done, do in society. And the idea that our labour actually only counts when we pay tax to the government, that is the productive labour. We don't get counted for all the work that we do in the house. That work is uncounted for because the government doesn't take a tax for it. They don't count us. It's just opaque. But there is also, I talk about the triple burden, because if we look at what's going on in the community, what we see is women are doing a larger share of community roles, and this has come to light very clearly with COVID-19 and the amount of additional community roles. And if you look at the gendered nature of those roles, you'll see that an awful lot more of them were fulfilled by women than men. So balancing all of those things is something that is a triple burden for women. I could go on. I don't want to be overly negative, but I do think that we mustn't forget about the commodification of women's bodies and our practices when it comes to tourism, and the repetition of tourism performance that can reinforce stereotypes and our sense of otherness, our economic dependence, and traditionalism in places where women want to move on from what their society is dictating as a woman's role. And I also think that we cannot shy away from the gender-based violence aspects of tourism. Gender-based violence is everything from the micro harassment right through to femicide, which goes on in tourism. And tourism provides a space for gender-based violence. You know, the gross director in the United States, he was taking girls back to hotel rooms. It's hotel rooms, it's bars, it's the hospitality sector where women face huge dangers when it comes to tourism. I've just written the what do you call it, the beginning of a book dedicated to this topic, which is newly out. But you can see there, you know, half of women working in the hospitality put up with sexual harassment, either by guests or by superiors. And this doesn't only go on in hotels. Women in the cruise industry also put up with an awful lot of gender-based violence in a variety of different forms. So I don't want to, as I say, I could go on and on about these topics, but I think that it's also incredibly important to remember that tourism can be very positive for women, all right? That tourism can empower women rather than burden them. It can provide them with new roles and new income. And that income can very often be their economic security, and it can lead to their independence. It can mean that they get away from violence because they've got their own money. It can give them increased confidence, confidence because they have their own money, but also confidence because it gives them a voice. Having a voice and working in tourism can often lead to increased decision-making power. And while I look at the community burden on the one side, involvement in community affairs and being able to be linked to your community can be hugely empowering. So, and it's some of these things that I think we need to really think about, why this and not the other side, and how we can ensure that this side rather than the other side is what women experience. So Regina Skevings, who's was the first person to actually talk about empowerment in tourism. She brought it from the development literature into the tourism literature, and she talks about empowerment being of four different types. She talks about the economic empowerment, having the money, and that, as I was saying earlier, is where the UN, WTO, the WTTC, and these other organisations which try and speak for tourism, when they're talking about empowerment, they're talking about economic empowerment. And economic empowerment is only one type of empowerment. It's only one quarter, one slice of the story. And if it's the only slice you're talking about, you're not really talking about empowerment. The second type of empowerment is psychological empowerment. It's about the pride. It's about how we feel inside, and that is just as important as the economics. I've written dreams and realities of communities that have had tourism for a long time. It really hasn't changed their economic fortunes at all. They're still dead poor, but it has given them hope, and it has given them dreams, and it has given them pride. And if we have no hope, and we have no dreams, and we have no pride left, what do we have left? You know. Part of empowerment. That's the power in empowerment, and that's the bit that I call true empowerment. Okay, empowerment that focuses on redressing power imbalances, about giving women autonomy to manage their own lives. It's about resisting oppression and having full participation, about being able to take ownership over our decisions and having the power to stick with what we want. All right, and it's that form of empowerment which is vital to sustainable development and the realization of human rights. Okay, yes, if you give women money, they are more likely to get here, but not necessarily. Yes, if they have pride and dreams and hope, they are more likely to get here, but not necessarily. And yes, if they're part of a community, they are more likely to get here, but not necessarily. They can have those other forms of empowerment without having true empowerment. And I call it the 3 A's of empowerment: a woman having autonomy, agency, and authority. The autonomy is about having the choices. The agency is about being able to make things happen. One thing is to have choices, another thing is to be able to take initiative and make those things happen. And the third one is to have a voice, to be looked up to, and to be respected. And I want to show through some examples, and I'm just do a little around Africa. Somebody was saying earlier, you know, you can't talk about Africa, and I couldn't agree more. You know, you've got to be considerate of all those different countries, the different contexts, and what is applicable in one context is not necessarily applicable in another context. But just to use a few examples. So looking at Buna Bana's work in Uganda, and this is of her work really talks to this idea about the double burden, because the women there need their husband's permission in order to get into tourism, and they only get that permission if they can balance domestic work and gardening work with their tourism work. And they did face violence from the men in their lives if they didn't succeed in doing the domestic work and the gardening work before they did their tourism work. And what they said that means was that you just had to be really good at time planning. For those who were good at time planning and did get the permission and did take part in the tourism, they had transformational experiences from the income. The income meant that they could save, they could invest in land, they could use it to educate daughters, and there is evidence of a transformation of gender norms. One little almost a footnote, but I think it's something that we really have to be very, very careful about when we're talking about women's empowerment projects, is that in many cases it leads to men's disempowerment. I was working on a project in Mexico, and for the additional income a woman brought into a family, a man would spend more money on gambling and alcohol, and it didn't change family fortunes unless women were able to leave men. So I think that we have to be very cognizant of bringing the men with us when we look at women's empowerment projects. Without it, I think it can be very troublesome. I'd also like to move to Mozambique and look at the example of one particular lodge, which when it set up to develop, it was in an area where there wasn't previous tourism knowledge, so they couldn't find anybody with work experience, and in the local area very high levels of literacy, especially among women, and as is typical of very many places, a huge amount of male resistance to women having employment, and among the women a complete lack of self-confidence that they actually would be able to do the roles that were available. The founders of Zalala Beach went to work with local leaders, and I think Camilla was talking earlier about the importance of local leadership when we're doing capacity development work, and the importance of doing gender awareness at the community level through local leaders was critical to Zalala's success. They recruited a manager who had got commitment to the values of responsible tourism, and they considered that to be that they had to bring in a manager from outside. They had hoped to find somebody local, but nobody local had the knowledge that was necessary, and also that commitment to responsible tourism values. And they have done very intensive ongoing job training, including family-friendly staff policies. And this family-friendly staff policies, if you look at the work that's being produced in Portugal, a huge piece of quantitative research that's looked at managers across the tourism industry, and where there are female managers, there is more likely to be female-friendly staff policies, and female-friendly staff policies are family-friendly staff policies, and it's women that use these policies, and there's some interesting work about how men come to understand the need for them and appreciate them as well. Very interesting work coming out of Portugal on that topic, a huge data set, I think 1,500 managers that they took part in the research. Mozambique has had quite a lot of misfortune of late, and the founders of Zalala have been talking about how their efforts have affected the community even when there's been no tourism. So aside from just an additional source of income, women who have gone to work in the lodge have developed new and transferable skills, and this group solidarity that they have felt has gone further than the lodge and into the community. In the words of Fuma, who worked in the laundry for 5 years at the lodge, said that she'd never had a paid job before, but that it was the best thing that had happened in her life, and how her life had changed a lot. Her husband treats me differently. He listens to what I have to say. The third A of Stromer's empowerment, showing there somebody actually listens to me, and how important that was to how she's feeling. The work of Zalala's gone on through the community. There's a huge port being built near where they are. Tourism has been terribly disrupted by the floods and the politics, but the work in the community has continued, and I think that speaks to working in the community before we think about tourism, or doing these things in parallel and not just looking at tourism, but looking at it from a wider community perspective. I think some work from Namibia is also very interesting, because it does show that while in general male-headed households are economically better off, where there's a lot of female-headed households in various different countries in Africa, and an awful lot of households where a woman is the head of the household, and she's got children from sisters, and she's the auntie or the granny, complex multiple female-headed households, and they are better off than those without equally well-off male heads of households. So it shows that this research on tourism employment was very clear in that the cash income made a difference to the families, and it went beyond just the employment, but into other areas of gender inequality. So I think the pictures that we are getting from direct tourism employment is of their empowering effects, even when the cash contribution is very small. It can be quite transformative nonetheless. But I also think it's incredibly important for us to not just think about tourism per se, but the linkages in tourism, right? That for every tourism development project, there is multiple opportunities for linking beyond it. And I think that this is very important for us to consider in the context of climate change as well. Because if we are just looking at mitigations for tourism and not looking throughout the value chain, we are going to be missing some of the very important points that need to be considered. And when we're considering about the vulnerabilities and of projects, then we need to be considering it through the value chain. So I just want to share with you that one of the projects from Equality in Tourism, which is about empowering women farmers through tourism. So it's the project is based in near to Moshi, which is the town where tourists go who are going to go climb Kilimanjaro. So it's the focal point for one of Tanzania's big tourist attractions. And what we discovered was that the women farmers around Moshi are incredibly poor. Poverty, you know, at that really desperate level. The woman in the top picture there, that is her entire house, and it wasn't built for human habitation. And one of the reasons for their poverty is that they could grow very small excesses. You know, a kilo extra of beans or 2 handfuls extra of tomatoes, but it tended to be that they were all having the same excesses at the same time, and they would just try and sell them to one another. But that a broker would come round and buy 1 kilo from each house, and they would bulk it up and they would sell it to another broker who would take it to the market from where the hotel would buy it, so that the produce went through 4 different brokers before it reached the hotels. And that was the reason why women were receiving such tiny amounts for the food that they were producing. So our project was a project to do farming direct from the producers to the hotels, to the tourists that were going to consume that food, and to get the hotels on board about the importance of provenance of food and tell the women stories as a way of showing their corporate social responsibility. We got all the hotels in the area for a year to write down what vegetables they purchased, so we knew precisely what quantities of what vegetables were required during what seasons, because of course tourism is terribly seasonal. And we've set up a co-op so that the women are all in a cooperative, trying to drive out the idea of one woman competing against another, but also giving them training in agricultural techniques to help them be able to produce more on their small plots of land, and in biological pest control, in companion planting, and various other techniques to cut down on pests. And also to provide a nursery for the women's kids, so that they're not burdened by trying to do agriculture whilst looking after small children. When we conceived of this project, we wanted 25 women to take part in a pilot. 75 women turned up to our initial meeting, and several men, as you'll see in that picture there. When we explained to the men that this was a project for women, they just said, well, could their wives come? To which, of course, we said yes. And we also did quite a lot of community work introducing the project to men in the community, so they didn't feel threatened by it and would be supported by it. But we did want it to be a project specifically for women. So just one example of a project that looks at the linkages. Now, come COVID-19, of course, no tourists, no hotels buying any of the vegetables, but what we're hearing from the women is that they have got food, okay, and they can, we've got a little shop in town where they can sell their vegetables directly to other people, and that is providing them with a tiny additional income. But they are not hungry, these women, and I think that food security through their agricultural development as the the other thing that the pandemic has done has really revealed the vulnerability of destinations which are over-dependent on tourism. And this is where some countries in Africa, of course, are on the advantaged side because they haven't got this massive over-dependence in tourism. I know that some places have, but largely speaking, as we were hearing earlier, tourism in Africa is less well developed, so there's less of this problem of over-dependence. However, what we do know is that tourism has hurt the poorest countries the most, and the impact on tourism, and particularly to women in those countries. And the reasons being that, you know, goes back to my earlier slides, the women involved in the gig economy on the lowest rungs of the occupational ladder, people who don't have permanent contracts are the first to be let go.
Professor Stromakol, sorry. Could you share your screen again, as we lost the connection and we lost your presentation, please?
Yep. So I go there. Are you seeing it again now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep, you got it again, good. Where was I? Many women are in the informal sector, and they're in the linked industries, but they're in small businesses. And around the world, governments have come up with packages of support, but this support has very rarely reached the informal sectors and even small businesses, because they're not registered, because they don't have access to the help which has been provided for by governments. Women have also been at a higher risk of closure because of the burden of unpaid care work and domestic work, particularly when this has come to having old people who are no longer looked after and children who are no longer in school, and therefore they are unable to put the energy that they were previously putting into their businesses. We see that credit, where it has been shelled out, hasn't been shelled out equally, that women have less access to credit, and they have got less savings on which to fall back on. And so that's another reason why they have been worse hit by COVID-19. The consequences of that have in many places been a fall in income, higher incidences of poverty, and in many cases that is poverty, you know, below the poverty line, hungry, right? We've got that in the UK, right? Let alone in places where, I mean, we're supposed to have a safety net in this country. In countries where there is no safety net, this is leading to serious hunger problems. Increased financial dependence, where there was financial independence previously from tourism, you go back to financial dependence. We're seeing increased gender-based violence. One of the reasons for that is some of my respondents in Indonesia are saying because of the financial difficulties, men are stressed, arguments develop, they become violent. In other places, it's because of lockdown and being locked down with people who have become violent. And what we're seeing is the more tourism dependent a place is, the worse it is. So COVID-19 has delivered a terrible blow to tourism internationally, but when we unpick at the local level and what it's doing to women, it's, you know, a very sad story indeed for many women. And I could be talking about all the positive agency that women have used to go online, to try and create businesses, and selling online, converting their businesses, marketing their businesses, using the time to reset their businesses, and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that when people talk about, and it's great to talk about the positive things, I think that and there's definitely learning to be had from the positive which is going on, but I'm hearing the need to talk up the positive side of it more than I'm hearing people who actually want to confront the realities. So when we come out the other side of this pandemic, we know we've got to rebuild global tourism in a more sustainable way. And we know that the pandemic is a consequence of climate change, right? And we know that with climate change, there are going to be increasing numbers of diseases spreading around the world, right? Whether they become pandemics or not is another issue, but we know that it's not a natural disaster. It is because people are moving around, we carry those viruses with us, and because of destruction of habitats means there's a greater jump from one species to another. So we need to really consider not alleviating overdependence on tourism, and programs which develop diversification. All right, this is really critical. Wherever you develop tourism, the tourism genie comes out of the jar. You get more and more and more tourism until you get to the point of over-tourism or over-dependence on tourism, without considering the broader diversification and the what if there isn't tourism. And we've really got to keep that full front and centre as our learning from COVID-19. I hear a lot about people talking about build forward, build back better. That's the expression that's being used. And I don't want to go back to what we have had. And I don't like the idea of building back better. I want to build forward better. I want to look forward to a time of gender equality. I want to look forward to a time of non-dependence on tourism. I want to look forward to a time where tourism is used as a tool to empower women to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. I want us to, somebody was talking earlier about matrices for tourism, so that we have a tourism where, you know, tourism is going to add to climate change, but tourism can also help people, and where is that balance going to lie? Well, as long as that metrics that is developed includes a metrics on gender equality, at the moment these metrics are not including gender equality as a factor. So when we develop our post-COVID tourism, it needs to have a human rights, gender just starting point. And in order to do that, we need disaggregated data. And that data doesn't only need to be about sex, but it also needs to be about race, about age, and about ability, disability, diffability, okay? Without that complex of data, and everyone talks about big data, but they're not, if you don't collect the data on the ground, then you can't use data to inform decision making. So we need far more disaggregated data to use. And I will come back to the double burden, to the care economy, to reproductive labour, and until the time spent in the care economy and reproductive labour is considered, we're not going to have a sustainable way forward. We're not going to have a gender just way forward. And investing in the care economy is an investment in everybody's future. The best way to do it, wherever you are, is to consider local context and enhance women's voice and agency in that local context. There are women's rights organisations all over the world, all over Africa, in every single country, and linking tourism with those women's rights organisations is the best way to ensure that you start down the path of a gender just human rights approach. When I was introduced, my paper about gender equality being essential for sustainable tourism, it's not for women, it's for everybody. It will be responsive to everybody's needs because women understand the needs within their community. And if you understand the needs within the community, you can improve resilience to future shocks. All right. Investing in social infrastructure everywhere, family-friendly policies everywhere, they will benefit everyone. Accelerating women within the workforce, all right, through professional and vocational education. And this means to target, it means to positively discriminate for women world. And governments can start, they can invest in the development of women-owned businesses. At the moment, they'd be supporting women-owned businesses. Every time a government needs something, they could be asking, who owns that business? Where's the gender equality in that business? Every time we buy a holiday, we could be asking that question. Is this company that we're about to buy our holiday from invested in gender equality? Do they have a gender equality policy? How do they show that they follow through on their gender equality policy? Even if it's not women owned, if it's got women managers, if it's got women on the board, those are choices that everybody can make. And as this is a UN statistic, I've forgotten which UN organisation now, but if we doubled the investment in the care economy, right, we would create 475 million jobs. Okay, jobs for everyone that would make lives for women more likely to be about empowerment and to be about burden. So just a summary of my thoughts. In general, women have jobs which represent their traditional domestic activities, all right, and therefore they articulate existing patriarchal power relations, and that is not about empowering women. However, tourism, if done well, can be a lifeline and can be very empowering for very poor women. Although just giving women jobs is not empowering them. You have to do more than just give them a job. Tourism will only be sustainable when gender equality is a central pillar of it. Any sustainable tourism project I can look over and I can say, or yay or nay. Has it got gender equality at the centre of it? Has it got it as a central pillar of it? If not, sorry, but it's not really sustainable. we've got to see tourism as part of a diversified strategy. Anyone that is going for tourism and isn't looking at the value chain and how climate change is going to affect the value chain, and a tourism only project is likely to cause more harm than good going into the future. And I would say that everyone should build forward better for a more resilient future, and putting gender equality, human rights just, gender equality just at the centre of that recovery is going to mean we will have a more resilient future. And any questions?
Thank you very much, Professor Stromakol, for this very interesting presentation. For us, it's a big pleasure to count with your participation in this conference. We are on time with the program, so probably we have time for only one question, maybe. I would like to invite the audience or the panelists, authorities in this platform, if they want to make a question to the professor. Professor Matthias, maybe, or Olivia are interested in ask or comment about this topic, please.
Just to say that I enjoyed very much the presentation. It was very interesting. I think we should underline the idea that the sustainable tourism is not truly sustainable tourism. Is not promote gender equality. I think it's a very strong idea that should be underlined. And just to say that we would like to have here with us Professor Stromakol in the future, presentially, I mean, in person, to deliver a conference or seminar about these interesting topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there any question from the participants in the audience in our YouTube channel? Well, I think there is no. Well, there are comments about the great presentation of the professor, of course, but there is not a specific action. Well, with this, I would like to thank you very much to all panelists, authorities, and Professor Stromakol. With this, we are finalizing the morning session. Next is the parallel session at 3 p.m. Canary Island time. Remember, please, the full program, you can find it in our official website of the conference, amenet.ulpgc.es. Well, thank you very much again. Have a nice lunch and see you at 3 p.m. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Matthias, everyone, Jorge. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a lunch. Have a nice lunch. Bye. Thank you.